This podcast is brought to you by Atlas VPN, who is currently running a huge deal for Moore's Law is Dead fans. Click the link in the description to support Moore's Law is Dead and get Atlas VPN for $1.83 a month with 3 months for free. But also support Moore's Law is Dead by using the offer code BrokenSilicon for 10% off Vite Ramen, or the offer code Broken Silicon for 25% off all Windows keys at cdkeyoffer.com. You can also use DieShrink to get 3% off everything else on that website. And we'll talk about these supporters later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom. Today, I am joined by the hopefully now fully recovered
Dan.
Dan, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good right now, I suppose. I don't know.
You know, when I look at this episode, it's, at least in terms of reader mails and stories, fairly girthy. But I don't know. I guess we'll see. I doubt this is going to get to 3 hours, but it's a pretty large episode. But I guess that's unsurprising considering this is really the first one we've recorded for almost 2 weeks since we were on vacation. Yeah, when this will come out, we were on vacation a week and a half ago.
Yes.
Now, I would say what happened to me was a vacation. Now, our family was planning to go on this like trip to Ireland. Our mom was planning, and you know, it was supposed to take up a whole week. That's why we had those pre-recorded, you know, the APU segmentation, 2 podcast episodes all dropped in 1 week. But when I landed for a connecting flight in Charlotte, I got a text from Mom saying, Dan has COVID. We don't know what's happening.
Yep. So I don't know how much I want to dwell on it. It kind of sucks, but we're rescheduling. And I don't know. I guess you got to go on 2 mini vacations, though. So.
Yeah, basically, we tried to figure out how much we could get refunded because, like, you know, the debate becomes, do we really want to do a trip now? If you are not there, you're one out of 4 people in this family that's supposed to go. Or, you know, if, you know, then I think ultimately we made the right decision to just see if we can reschedule it.
And I think we will be able to, so.
Right, and now as we especially know that was the right decision because now it sounds like we definitely will be able to later this year. But man, imagine if we wouldn't have, and you'd have just been recovering from being sick and just, Dan, look where we are today. Dan,
oh, cool. We're in, yeah, just, I imagine like just sending me hundreds of pictures constantly like, oh, look at where we are, Dan. What are you doing?
Well, yeah, and I don't know what our mom would have done. She probably would have been like, well, do we say nothing and just pretend we're not on a trip? Or do we just, or would she have done that mom thing they sometimes do where they're like, wish you were here, Dan, but look where you're not at. A picture, because I swear she does that sometimes.
Yeah, she does. She does.
Of course, she means well, but I guess, you know, yeah, so I managed to like, when I went to Mammoth Caves in Kentucky, there was since we were already there, we did a small trip in North Carolina where we just stayed there after and just canceled the flight that was going to be after that connecting flight. But I guess I am curious. I know you watched I Think You Should Leave. Did you? And you seem pretty sick the first few days, but you seem mostly recovered after halfway through the week. Like, did you catch up on any video games, or what else did you do, or was it not really worth?
I don't know. I mean, I watched some shows. Trying to get some scientific work done because we're trying to put out a paper soon too. So, you know, do some work there when I can. But I'm trying to think. I guess I've been watching the other 2 as well as I Think You Should Leave. Recommend both.
I really, really recommend the other 2 on HBO, or I guess now it's called Max.
Oh yeah, I mean,
because HBO is such a bad brand, we gotta get rid of that, right?
There's the counter theory that some people have that they don't what are they called? Discovery Time Warner now? I can't remember what they're called after the merger. I think it's that. But there's a counter theory that they don't want to sully the name of the HBO brand with the heaping pile of shit that Discovery is about to put onto it. Either way, it's
maybe that's
stupid.
why. Well, yeah, because the other argument I've heard is that they're worried people in the center of the country, which is where I am, and I like the other two, think HBO sounds too liberal for mass appeal. That is an argument I've heard on several podcasts. But it's like, well, when you look at the new shows coming out on HBO, it doesn't seem like they're really getting away from that. So, well, you know, one thing, though, that does not get old is talking about the prices of VRAM. And since we don't have any corrections or opening reader mail today, I thought we would just jump straight in to story number one. Story number one, GDDR6 VRAM prices plummet. 8 gigabytes of memory now supposedly costs just $27. Quoting from Tom's Hardware, due to the rapidly dropping demand for graphics cards in recent quarters, coupled with the end of the component shortages of 2021, prices on GDDR6 memory have plummeted. As noticed by 3dcenter.org, spot prices of GDDR6 decreased to less than a quarter of what they once were during the past 1.5 years. Let's see, a quarter, so what, $27 for 8 gigabytes, so times 4. That sounds about right, yeah. At present, 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 now cost $27. However, it must be remembered that there were other considerations besides the flat per gigabyte price as well. Adding memory chips to both sides of a graphics cards, like would be required to make an RX 7600 to get to 16 gigabytes, does add complexity because you have to clamshell to get there with the design. Still, it's very easy to conclude that even in unideal situations, it shouldn't cost more than $50 to $70 to add 8 gigabytes to just about any card, even after accounting for margin. And therefore, it is safe to assume that an RX 7600 16 gigabyte should have an MSRP of $339, and a 4060 Ti should not cost more than $469 if these companies were being reasonable. And the only thing I would note to this story about how RAM is basically back to normal prices, if not even lower than where it was a few years ago, and like the general idea of complaining about adding $100 to the 4060 Ti cost to get to $500 for that model is that you do have to keep in mind that there is some balancing going on here at these companies. Like, so let me think of a good example here. All right, adding 16 gigabytes to the 4080, let's say that would only add, you know, I don't know, $100 to $150. Right, but that's current pricing. So if all 4080s, though, now we're using 16 more gigabytes. If all 4060...
It would drive prices up.
It would definitely drive prices up if there was any reasonable amount of demand for these products, which that's all I'm going to say is that when you see, well, it shouldn't cost more than like $40 or $50, I think these companies would be prudent to add another $10 to it so that they control demand a little bit, because otherwise, I mean, if every card had double the RAM, they're not making twice as much RAM. That's part of the price. But still, the point is, $500 for a 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte is absurd. They could totally afford to make that $450, or probably just $400 as well.
Yeah, I mean, I doubt it will, but hopefully this means that, well, it might mean the price of the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte drops on the market relatively quickly if there's just not a lot of demand and the RAM gets cheaper. Hopefully it will just decrease below what $500 that it's being priced at right now. But yeah, I think they're being greedy even before the price of RAM plummeted. We knew they were being greedy. So I don't know how much there's to say other than like, hopefully they won't continue being greedy, and hopefully the 4060 Ti 16 drops to like 470 within a month or two. And also, I guess, I imagine the 4060 Ti was probably going to be the lower demand unit. I mean, the 16 gigabyte model will be lower demand. So hopefully having a bunch of 16 gigabyte models wouldn't necessarily, releasing a bunch of 16 gigabyte models won't redrive prices up. But
well, not at $500 now.
Well, no. Yeah.
Although NVIDIA, from what I'm hearing, is hoping that the 16 gigabyte model makes up for the basically non-existent demand for the 8 gigabyte model right now.
We'll see. I mean, I don't see why that $500 card would have much more demand than the 8 gigabyte version. they're both poorly priced. $500 is just too much for that level of performance anyway, so I don't know why. I don't know what they're expecting this to be a higher volume, if they're expecting it to be higher volume than the 8 gigabyte base model. I definitely wouldn't bet money on that.
Well, yeah, and especially not when, you know, you can get a 6800 XT, which is 30% stronger or something for this exact same price right now. I mean, even if you undervolted it to get to the same efficiency, you'd probably be a little stronger and cost less or something. So, you know, I guess I'll save some of this discussion for upcoming stories that cover these cards. The one thing I will say, though, is even if it would probably, if literally NVIDIA or AMD right now said our entire lineup doubles RAM capacity and we only added $50 to $100 to the price, absolutely that is going to drive up VRAM prices overall. Oh, yeah. But I think minor edge cases it won't. And it would, we keep coming back to like what AMD is going to do with Navi 32. For sure, I think they should just give the 7700 XT 16 gigabytes. And maybe even the 7700 if that is a thing that they want to charge for, you know, $400 foreign release.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's...
Like going from 12 to 16 isn't going to drive up a lot.
Yeah, AMD is less stingy with their RAM. I wouldn't be surprised if at least the 7700 XT, all the way to that, has 16 gigabytes of RAM still. That seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Yeah. All right, now I want to move on, kind of in this vein of discussion, to a reader mail question from Bullethead who says, "Hey Tom, can any of your game dev sources comment on the validity of this argument about texture issues in modern games? Sharif, FYI, basically argues on Twitter that DirectX 12 bindless APUs force developers to be fully in charge of which textures would stay resident in VRAM in a way they didn't have to before. And unfortunately, most of them seem to be making them all resident and then just lowering all of the textures at once instead of optimizing certain textures to hit different performance targets that would require a lot of optimization work." So I saw this make to get shared around a bit. I thought this was a really good question too from a patron, which of course you can ask questions to support us on Patreon. Because it's kind of arguing the other side of what's going on right now with devs and VRAM capacity and needing more RAM. You know, Sharif, FYI, which to be fair, I don't really know much about this guy, but the argument proposed on Twitter is that DirectX 11 basically handled more things for you before. You have to handle more of it now with DirectX 12. And because of that, because devs aren't bothering to do that, they're basically just not handling it and just turning all textures down to lower resolutions. That's why you get a situation like The Last of Us Part 2 on PC, this person says, where with like medium textures, you're actually using more than 12 gigabytes of VRAM, and yet it looks worse than the PS5 version's textures until they patched it later. Well, Bullethead, I was actually very curious about this, and I actually did reach out to 2 developers who gave me very lengthy answers to this, and I think they're very illuminating. And so I just want to read both of them. So the first answer I got comes from a render tech expert at a studio who tells me, DirectX 11 reduces risk in general, but it obscures hardware. I guess you could argue it blocks you from shooting yourself in the foot, but there are several problems adding together in modern PC gaming that are exacerbated the more visually complex the game becomes, and the more visual variety in the game, the more exponential this issue becomes as well. The more exposed pipeline in DirectX 12 and Vulkan theoretically does offer devs more potential, but the added complexity means you have to build this texture lookup yourself, but then that also risks you make your game too complex to even use the system like this at all. So at the end of the day, I would argue there's some truth to those tweets from Sharif, but at the same time, that truth doesn't really change reality. If people want next-gen graphics, they need this next-gen way of doing things. And this way does allow us to optimize for weaker hardware if it has a big install base. But then also, we can run it on everything else, weaker things than before with DirectX 11 by toggling down settings across the board. But doing optimizations for 100 different configurations with next-gen graphics, that's not going to happen. Modern engines have both made powerful hardware better utilized and enabled weaker hardware to play the same games, but we're not going to do both at the same time. There's not enough hours in the day. Now, I want to read another one here. This comes from another dev who's an FX artist that says, this issue this person talks about is definitely a known issue that most developers are constantly dealing with. For example, my studio spends the last few weeks before releasing a big content package making sure we haven't increased the resident memory usage too much, but we always manage to get to what we need to with the tools that we at least built. Thus, keeping textures resident depends on the studio, and in my experience, most studios have an adequate way for assets to get around it and stream instead. Well, if you have enough VRAM or a fast SSD, that is. I guess some studios are dealing with it worse, but time is always limited. For example, the PS4 requires heavy-handed work in keeping textures resident, but it's worth that extra effort to make that huge install base function perfect at launch. And so think about it. Once you optimize for the PS4 version, that is the big install base that has a hard drive and only 8 gigabytes of RAM, and you got that covered. And well, again, any system out there with a fast SSD and ample RAM makes this a non-issue. And then remember that what I said about consoles and gaming PCs with limited memory, each one of those could take weeks to optimize. Before a big content package, we spend weeks optimizing this. So, as usual, arguing that devs are getting lazy misses the point. There's always more work you can do to squeeze down RAM usage. And there's always another explosion one might want to put on screen if you have extra RAM. But time and budgets are limited. The PS5 has a design, for example, and the tools that make this very easy to work to do. And the PS4 has a massive install base that means we can't ignore prioritizing and optimizing it. After that, honestly, many enthusiast gaming PCs already have an NVMe SSD, 16 to 32 gigabytes of RAM, and a 12 gigabyte or higher GPU. And then we'll just have to patch it after launch for better optimizations for the other dozen broad configurations we're expected to worry about now. And that's what we're going to keep doing unless you want all games to come out 1 to 2 years later for the 8 gigabyte GPU people. Remember, everybody, 8 gigabytes of RAM is $27. When devs ask you to buy more RAM, we're asking you to spend $27 more so we don't have to delay every game 2 years. So a 10 gigabyte console and GPUs from a decade ago can continue to pretend they're high end. So I don't know if this has almost become its own story, honestly, on this episode, Dan, but I thought this was one of the best counter arguments I've ever seen to kind of what we've been covering on this channel for a while about VRAM usage. What are your thoughts to what these two developers said?
I mean, it's kind of the same thing you hear, like when you hear about someone editing a script or a book or whatever, like, yeah, you can always squeeze more out. You can always edit to death and find something way you can slightly improve whatever you want. But at the end of the day, how much time are they going to spend optimizing for graphics cards that are frankly like probably dying? Like if you're still gaming on like a 1070 or something, it's a pretty old card at this point. I know some new cards are coming out with 8 gigabytes of RAM, but 8 gigabytes of RAM is going the way of the dinosaur unless you're like want to play at 1080p medium settings. So this idea of having the max setting have to fit in an 8 gigabyte buffer makes no sense to me, because 8 gigabytes has been around forever. And yeah, I guess there's endless work you could do to use less than 8 gigabytes of RAM, but we're getting to a point where most new cards sold are going to have 12 plus gigabytes of RAM.
Right. So, and I want to be clear about what these both devs seem to be saying here. And I did actually throw back, hey, it sounds like you're saying this. Just to be clear, that's how we're going to portray it on the show. Is that what you mean? And they said, yes, absolutely. That's what we mean. The point is, number one, you have something like the PS4 that has 120 million install base, and you're kind of optimizing for the Xbox One. You're just going to turn down the resolution because it's weaker, right? So for those two consoles combined getting to like 150, 160 million, you're going to put in all the work for 8 gigabytes of RAM and a hard drive, which is horrible at streaming. That's worth the effort. After that, the PlayStation 5 has easy to use tools, a decently big and growing install base, and an SSD that makes it easy to stream all this crap in on the fly between different scenes. So those are just covered without too much. One of them requires effort, but it's kind of one thing. And then this doesn't require much effort. After that, the Series X is kind of close to the PS5, although we'll get into it later if it's showing RAM issues with some upcoming titles at lower frame rates. And then after that, you get to PC. All right. Well, if we're being honest, like a fourth of enthusiast PCs aren't going to have issues because they have the latest SSDs and at least 12 gigabytes of RAM. Yes, there's a large contingent of PC gamers with 8 gigabytes, but like 80% of those 8 gigabyte cards are old cards.
Yeah, so it's like lower settings to medium. I'm sorry. Like,
and yes, medium looks like low on launch day for 8 GB cards until a patch comes out a month later, because once the game's out and it's working well for PS4, PS5, Series X, and the best gaming PCs, there's this other contingent of people that they're then going to optimize for after launch, unless you want, because it's just going to take months of like little tweaks here and there, basically. Or NVIDIA and AMD, we're being honest, and their drivers going in and tweaking some things themselves, which they do sometimes for launch day drivers, kind of. So it's all work. It's all man hours. And if they can cover last gen consoles, most of current gen consoles, not the Series S really, and a third of high end PCs, and then the rest of the configurations, like Group 5 is going to take months of work. That's not going to probably happen at launch, because they want to make sure they launch on time.
Yeah. I mean, when you have, I guess that's the issue that happens when you have a bunch of different configurations that have such a wide range of specifications, because I don't think people are really complaining about this anymore, at least. But like, I mean, some people still want to be able to game on a hard drive, which is just not possible anymore, really. And NVMe drives even have been at a decent price point for a while now. Yeah, I think you can afford to get a 1 terabyte SSD NVMe, or
Gen 4, not Gen 5 at this point.
Yeah, or a 512 gigabyte one for like what, $70-$80. I mean, I don't even think it'll be that much at this point.
If it's half a terabyte, yeah.
So it's just like at a certain point, if you're not willing to upgrade your specs, I don't know why you expect to get better picture quality or better performance over time. There's just been like this weird thing with a contingent of PC gamers where we should have more system RAM over time, more cores in our CPUs, stronger graphics cards, but VRAM isn't a big deal for some reason.
And let's keep in mind, when you look at minimum settings for some upcoming games, almost all of them say you need an SSD now, but some of them say SSD runs better. The version of the game that runs on the hard drive that works okay is a system that somehow, for some reason, has a 16 gigabyte graphics card, a 64 gigabyte capacity of DRAM, and then a hard drive. And the reason they can use the hard drive is because they're filling up all this other crap instead. But most hard drive systems don't have 64 gigs of RAM or a 16 gigabyte graphics card. And so de facto, you need an SSD now, guys.
Yeah. So I don't know. It just actually kind of reminds me of when I had two 7950s in Crossfire. I actually wouldn't really use it that often because the GPU power I got out of two 7950s was hampered by only having 3 gigabytes of RAM, and that was 10 years ago. And I know that's 3 gigabytes, but 10 years ago, 3 gigabytes was a limiting factor if I wanted to try to play games in like
in 4K,
1440p,
even
sometimes
1440p
in 4K.
Sometimes. Yeah.
So like, yeah, I usually just had that for mining, the second 7950 for mining, because I would just rather not have the weird performance hiccups you could get with Crossfire, and I really couldn't get the performance out of it anyways. Like, so I would have to go down to like 1440p or somewhere between 1080p and 1440p if I wanted to play it anyways.
Yeah, and you know, what I would say is, you know, obviously I only reached out to a couple devs, and luckily they both got back to me, I think with very interesting and well thought out answers. But I'm sure there's other developers of their own thoughts. Clearly, someone on Twitter here has their own thoughts as well. But, you know, I just want to make this clear, though. You know, these are just back and forth opinions. Every developer I've had on, you know, every developer that I know Hardware Unboxed, Steve at Hardware Unboxed has reached out to behind the scenes before talking on some Q&As. They, at least the ones we're talking to, unanimously say the same thing, that it's way overdue that we have more RAM. Maybe some devs will disagree on the side, but to those disagreements, I have some pretty well thought out multi-paragraph rebuttals. And it all basically comes down to, yeah, I mean, DirectX 12 makes it so you have to do a little more optimization work, and it seems like some devs aren't bothering to, but at the same time, most of them are. And at a certain point, DirectX 12 makes it so weak hardware can run any game, but it'll look like crap. and strong hardware works better. In the middle, if you don't have enough RAM, there's losers right now because we don't have time to optimize for every graphics card architecture like it's a console. It's just unreasonable. All right. Well, speaking of graphics cards that don't have enough RAM, let us move on to story number 2.
Jesse loves watching Netflix with me, but not just part of Netflix, all of Netflix regardless of the region. And why wouldn't we take advantage of all regions? We're paying for it. This regional content wall that goes up all the time depending on where you live is just silly, and you can avoid this silliness just like we are if you use Atlas VPN. This piece of content is sponsored by Atlas VPN. Atlas VPN is an incredibly affordable VPN that's become a long-term supporter of Moore's Law is Dead. And so if you need one, show them some love. But not just because I told you to, but also because Atlas VPN gains you access to content in other regions. Companies want to nickel and dime you for accessing. They also let you use Atlas VPN on unlimited devices, and they also stop ads and malware, including malicious links and trackers trying to steal your data. And actually, they also work to show the best prices available, subverting attempts to gouge you based on location or operating system. That one I think is actually incredibly useful in my opinion because it demonstrates you're actually paying for something here compared to some other competitors. They're not paying that much really. That's right, Atlas VPN can actually save you money every month despite only costing $1.83 a month if you click the link in the description. And they're running a big deal right now that will also give you another 3 months for free. Click the link in the description to protect your data and save you money. Clicking on that link alone helps the channel a lot. And also if you need a VPN, Atlas is pretty dang good. Support someone who supports Moore's Law is Dead. That's Atlas VPN today.
NVIDIA RTX 4060 set for June 29th launch. First reviews a day sooner, yet again. Quoting from Video Cards, those waiting to upgrade their systems with the 8GB 4060 should now mark their calendars for June 29th. This is officially the new release date for this entry-level graphics card. NVIDIA has changed the release date after officially confirming it on Twitter. The 4060 features the smallest Ada Lovelace GPU die called 8107 with 3072 CUDA cores and a 128-bit bus, but the memory is clocked lower than the 4060 Ti with 17 gigabit per second memory instead of 18 gigabit per second memory. This confirms a leak by Video Cards prior that outlined the new launch schedule. Originally, 4060 was announced for July, but Video Cards leaked that on June 9th, the press and influencers will get submissions. On June 12th, they will ship to channel NDA, and embargoes will lift. On June 21st, influencer seeding, and on June 28th, MSRP models get reviewed. June 29th, non-MSRP models, or above really, MSRP models will get reviewed. NVIDIA decided to price the 4060 at $300, which is indeed the cheapest desktop RTX 40 card so far, but still probably not the price that gamers were hoping for. So what did you think of this, Dan? Like, they announced July, and now it's coming out a little before July. Barely a little, but a little.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they they are hoping the 4060 will be met with more enthusiasm than the 4060 Ti, and they're pushing it up. I mean, I'm curious if that means that they just think the 4060 is a complete dud, and maybe even some 46.
The 4060 Ti, I mean.
Yeah, sorry, the 4060 Ti is a complete dud, and maybe they're pushing more chips to the 4060 or something.
That's something people got to understand. The 4060 Ti, at least some capacity of those would have been manufactured at the end of last year. And same with the RX 7600, although I actually kind of hear that RX 7600 may have had a lot manufactured. And then both companies just sat around and were like, hopefully things improve. Hopefully things improve. Month 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months go by. They're not improving. They just have to launch the 4060 Ti. They have to launch the 7600. You know, to the people that go, they should have just given the 7600 16 gigabytes from the start. Those boards are already manufactured, guys. So
yeah,
they had to at least launch like 30,000 of them.
There's a bunch of weird.
The only thing they could change is the name.
It's like there's a bunch of weird haphazard solder marks on all of these 18 gigabyte 7600s.
Not to mention, what are you going to pay a guy $20 per card to do that? It's not happening.
It won't work. Yeah.
So, you know, they had to do some 4060 Ti launch. They had to do a 7600 launch. So far, the 7600 selling I mean, it's not selling great, but it's selling above AMD's expectations. I would guess they're already shifting supply over to just not make many more of them, but they already have them. Those are going to sit there. And then the 4060 Ti, same situation. And, you know, when I talked to people, this was before the 4060 Ti even came out. People I talked to at AIB said, we don't even want to make this thing. Some retailer said we're not even stocking it. So I think there's no way around it. They made it ahead of time. They had to launch at least 30,000 of them. After that, they're going to sit on shelves, probably drop below MSRP. And the focus is going to be on the 4060 because it's going to be like 20% weaker than the 4060 Ti with the same amount of RAM. If it's 8 gigabytes, cheapest is best, guys, because all of these cards aren't going to do anything with higher settings.
I'm still in the camp of the 4060 numbers are weird to me. That it feels like it should be, sounds like it should be substantially weaker than the 4060 Ti to me. Like it has 40%. The 4060 Ti has 40% more cores than the 4060.
And the same bus.
And the same bus, and slower RAM, and some weird thing with its L2 cache that still seems.
Well, yeah, the desktop one is 24 megabytes of cache, whereas the 4060 Ti is 32.
Yeah,
but it goes to show that at this point, the memory bus is the bottleneck, Dan. I mean,
yeah, that's
what this all means, you know?
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. If it ends up being like 30% weaker than a 4060 Ti, I won't be surprised.
No, but that would be at most what it will be, Dan. Think about it. Same bus, yes, less cache, but that's not half of the bus really's performance. Like, it's not like it has a third the cache. And it's going from 4352, I believe. Well, I think I
3072.
Yeah, from 4352 in the 4060 Ti to 3072. So literally 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so I don't know. I would just split the difference, you know. Same bus, 40% less. What's that then able to? 20%. This thing will be 20 to 25% weaker, I think.
Okay.
You'll find scenarios where it's 30, but I don't think it's usually going to be 40% weaker because it's the bus. It's just, they really, you know, it's just absurd. It's just absurd. The 106 die doesn't have a 192-bit bus or even a 160-bit, so it had 10 gigabytes. If it even had 10 gigabytes for 400, and that made it 10% stronger as well, that would have been fine then.
If they could have released a 4060 with 10 gigs of RAM, honestly, I think 10 gigs for the level of performance is not perfect, but good enough. Like, I would prefer to see 12 gigabytes in both of these at least, but 10 is, I think, enough for this level of performance at least.
Yeah, well, and that's why we kept recommending the 6700 before. I think it's basically sold out now. Because that was this performance for that amount of RAM.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that was a temporary thing, right?
Well, so anyways, though, I guess, do you think the 4060 is going to sell? It's clear NVIDIA knows the 4060 Ti is a bust. I've just heard nothing but horror stories. Like, they expected it to sell bad, but like there's stores where they haven't sold one till now. Still haven't. Like nobody wants this bucket of crap. Do you think the 4060 is going to fare any better?
I think it's kind of dependent on where this. Maybe it's not. I don't know, but I think it's kind of dependent on the 7600 where the price of that falls when this comes out. Like, is the 7600's price going to be drifting down a little bit by then? Because if not, if it is, then I don't see any reason you would get a 4060. Like, the features it has, I don't think are worth like a 20% premium over the 7600.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be more or less a 7600 in performance, maybe a little stronger, but
it'll be around there. Yeah, of course. But yeah, you know, and it'll have, the only thing it'll have is DLSS, which is important.
Yeah.
But I'd say DLSS is worth 20% more money, maybe. But then you also have to factor in, but who's shopping for an 8 gigabyte card above 300 anyways? You know, so it's, you know, there's a reason I tweeted the 6600 is 180. This is an 8 gigabyte card that's, yes, 30% weaker, but it costs, 40% less for the same amount of RAM. And ultimately, all these cards are going to have to be at low settings. Guys, you're not going to need, then it's, I mean, the 6600 low settings in 1080p is going to run at crazy high frame rates anyways. All of these cards
Yeah.
are silly.
Yeah. That's not wrong.
Yeah. And I think there's also the question of, for the 4060, the one thing that I could also see surprising NVIDIA in bad sales, if it sells badly, is they'll have forgotten that not only there's something just to be said for just launching later is such an issue, because maybe if half a year ago the 4060 was out for $300, everyone would have gone, yeah, I'd rather get this than a 6700, because it's basically a 6700 with a little less RAM but half the power consumption, and it has DLSS, so that helps with that anyways. But it's been 6 months. There's been 6 months where anyone who wanted around an 8 gigabyte card maybe already bought the card because they've already gotten cheaper. And it's just like, who's left in this market by the time this comes out? And that might be a reason NVIDIA is trying to launch it as soon as possible as well, is they're just realizing the 8 gigabyte market has been so saturated with cheap stuff below $200 for half a year that maybe just, even if this is better now, no one's left to buy it.
Yeah, because everybody that's wanted 8 gigabytes has, they've been around for so long now. I don't know who this is for, I guess. Yeah, it's for people that weren't able to get a 6700 when it was still available, right?
Yeah, that's basically it. And it's not better, just the same thing, actually more money. All right, we have a reader mail here from Maverick, who writes in and says, hypothetically, what could NVIDIA have sold the 4070 and 4080 for, made decent margin, and also be something that you think the market would have found acceptable? Well, I've been covering this in recent episodes. I think there's a certain degree here where maybe the market's so mad we've forgotten a little bit what acceptable means. Like a decade ago, I keep highlighting this, the 7770 launched for more money than the street price of a 6850 and 6870. That was weaker than a 6850, but it was more efficient and had newer features. And so because of this, they were like, whoa, it's this performance at this power consumption and cheaper. And then they just knew everyone was going to buy the 6850. That was going to sell out, and the 770 would go down in price a little. That's what's going to happen with the 7600. That's pretty typical, But the 4070, the 4080, that's really so far beyond typical that I'd put it this way. The 4070 Ti and 4070 have a die that's only 7% bigger than the 3060's die. And they have the same amount of RAM as a 3060. Guys, this thing costs $50 to $100 more to make than a 3060. There's no way around it. The 4070 should have been what the 4070 Ti is for 550 max, and the 4070 should have been called the 4060 Ti 12 gigabyte for 450. If that would have happened, I think people would have accepted it. $550, 3090 performance, and then $450, 3080 performance with 12 gigabytes. And then the 4080 could have just used what is now the 4070 Founders cooler, been 900, and they could have been like, stronger than the 3090 Ti, $900 with 16 gigabytes. And that would have honestly undercut the 7900 XTX by $100.
Oh, yeah. I think the 4080, even at $1,000 against the 7900 XTX, wouldn't have been terrible. $900 would have just killed Navi 30.
It has the same die size as a 3070 Ti. They could have totally afforded that at $300, but it's a more expensive node. Done.
Yeah, if they could have if they launched that for $900, I think they would have just killed Navi 31 completely.
But I guess a point I want to make, though, answering Maverick's question here, which thank you for writing in, is I think we get these questions every other episode. What could this have been priced at and been acceptable? What could have this been and been acceptable? I started answering this question by bringing up the 7600 because it's like, I don't know if there's any price where anyone's excited. And I think $270 isn't good, but it's, if we use the word acceptable, everyone said it has to be under 300. It was $270. So would 250 be better? Sure. You know what also would have been better? $100. But it's never going to be exciting. However, I just don't think that way of thinking and that type of arguing applies remotely to the 4070 and up. It's not hard for me to conceptualize. The 4070 Ti has a 7% bigger die than the 3060 and the same amount of RAM.
Oh, yeah.
So charge an extra even 50% and it still would have been way higher margins than last gen. And I think the market would have accepted a $500 to $600 3090. They would have loved it. But NVIDIA just, I guess, decided they want to double the margins of last gen, which already had high margins, and no one's buying it.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything below the 4080 in NVIDIA's lineup right now seems like it's half a step. They're marketing it as half a step higher than what it is. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I think that's the best way to view it. Like, the 4070 Ti should be a 4070, and it should be cheaper than what it launched for. And that's kind of what everything that they've launched so far should be.
The 4060 Ti should be what the 4060 is, and it should be like $300.
Yeah, the 4060 should be a 4050 and be
250.
250, maybe.
It is a 150 millimeter square die.
Yeah.
It's a smaller die than the 3050. It's ridiculous. And I mean, even it applies to the 4080 too, though. The 4080, they're trying to sell it as a 4080 Ti for 4080 Ti pricing. It's not.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of a card that we have yet to know if it will be overpriced, let us move on to story number 3. Navi 32 physically seen in B-roll in a Forbes interview. Will AIBs register the 7800 XT 16GB? I'm quoting here from both Video Cards and Tom's Hardware. Forbes had a chance to talk to AMD CEO and President Lisa Su about the past and future of the company. This video is actually not very new, as we are looking at content that was published on May 31st. What is important, though, is that the B-roll footage embedded in that video shows a product that has not been announced yet, namely a Navi 32 GPU with just 4 MCDs and a smaller die than Navi 31. This was discovered by Hong An Fu on Twitter. Meanwhile, at the same time, ASRock has filed 2 new AMD graphics card model names with the Eurasian Economic Commission, the EEC. These names come with the anticipated RX 7800 XT nomenclature, suggesting we might see new mid-range 7800 XT graphics cards in the near future. The model names don't really tell us any specs, except that it has 16 gigabytes of memory as expected. And finally, this is coming from me personally, everybody, I can confirm that Navi 32 supposedly is still not expected to be ready until Q3. Although I guess we could say Q3 starts in July, but personally, it seems to me like AMD is preparing an RX 7800 XT 16GB based on a gaming version of the W7800, which is to say Navi 31, 70 compute units. And then Navi 32 is being verified for launch right now at AMD for probably the 7800 non-XT down to the 7700 non-XT to fill out the $400 to $600 market late this summer when Navi 22 and Navi 21 finished selling through. Yeah, I just think that any Navi 32 product would make much more sense as a 7800 non-XT the more I've been thinking about it this week. And the fact that that hasn't been registered yet makes me question why anyone would assume the upcoming 7800 XT uses Navi 32. Think about it. If the 7800 XT uses Navi 32, wouldn't they also register a Navi a 7800 non-XT because of the disabled version of it?
Yes.
Wasn't the 4060 like 7900 XTX and XT were registered at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. To be fair, though, I can't really be 100% sure of what the 7800 XT will use. All I can say is it seems like there's multiple different stories pointing to 16 gigabyte mid-range cards coming out from AMD before the end of summer. So what did you think about all of this, Dan?
You know, I think it's good to finally see Navi 32 like going somewhere, because there's been a weird thing around Navi 32 specifically where I don't know what your opinion is on this. I don't know if it's something went wrong and that's why it hasn't come out, because it's conspicuous that 32 is coming out after 33.
Well, that was always the plan, to be clear.
Okay.
All the way back to I think early last year, I was told 31 and 33, with 33 maybe even launching before 31, which, let's be clear about that. They may have had 33 ready before 31, but held it to launch because of the oversupply issues, guys. But those two are always going to launch around the same time as the initial plan. And 32 is always supposedly going to come. I think I always heard Q2 this year at the earliest. So it's coming out later than expected, maybe, but honestly, for me, not that much later. I think AMD's plan always was to have a dirt cheap 6 nanometer offering, 33, and the new flagship. And they always knew they were going to have a lot of high end cards from last gen to get rid of.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, maybe it's
but the
not
fact
delayed,
that they haven't
but
showed it literally at all, I agree with you. It is odd. They haven't literally even shown it.
Also, yeah, because I don't know. There's a huge gap in their market that Navi 32 is seemingly supposed to fill out with how many different models then? 3, 4, possibly?
Yeah.
Or, I don't know. I don't know. There's something weird with that. You would think they would want to launch the XT and the non-XT 7800 variants. The 7800 XT and non-XT at the same time. I think
unless
releasing those
one
things
of
in
them
pairs looks
uses
good.
a bigger die.
Yeah, that's
unless
true.
one of them's ready now and the other isn't ready yet.
yeah, exactly.
So that's what I think too, you know. And I saw some people talking in the Moore's Law said Discord, like, why would they need a lot of yields of 70 compute units for the 7800 XT? Like, why would you need to disable? I mean, I guess let me just do the math exactly just to get it right. 70 divided by 96. Like, what? Yeah, how many yields do you really have that need to be disabled down by like 27% or something? You know, and not that many on a 300 millimeter square die.
Mm-hmm.
But think about this though, and this is explained to me by an engineer at one of these GPU companies. What you're going to have is a couple defects that are very common, and that's what your 10 to 20% disabled yields are going to be turned into. You want to catch the amount of defects that make sense for percent of yields. So maybe only 10% of them have a one bad defect, but maybe there's 2 different types of bad defects depending on where it is on the die. So what you do is you disable for both of those. That's where you get the 7900 XT. Then the 7800 XT, maybe there's almost none of them that have 3 bad defects, but maybe there's 5 types of bad defects. You're going to make that bottom yield catch all of them instead of launching 5 variants on the bottom that are all different kinds of cards. Although that is kind of what NVIDIA did with GA102 with Ampere, if you think about it. But that's a rarity. You usually don't do that. And so that's why the 7800 XT would be disabled all the way down to 70 compute units. So they can take all these different types of disabled, then just cut the rest of it out, call it one thing. Also, no one said they're going to make a lot of these.
Yeah, and you know, those heavily disabled cards, they're uncommon, but they do happen. I mean, I think that suggests like what it did with NVIDIA, where they just went with. Sounds like a similar type of defect that they got with. They
just had more types of them, and so that is why they literally decided to make all of those different 3080s, 3090s, A5000s.
I mean, it definitely suggests that something went wrong with Navi 31's manufacturer, I would say, which I think we already pretty much know.
So I don't think so. Well, I mean, maybe with the architecture's performance, but no, Dan, with the yields, what I hear is they just haven't sold nearly as many 7900 XTs as they want to, and they need to find a way to sell it for less.
I mean, so if you have a five or whatever number it's a hypothetical.
5% of yields actually are that bad and aren't high clocking enough to be the W7800 at a lower voltage. And then you also have these worse power consumption versions of the 7900 XT that would become the 7900 XT in cheaper AIB models. If it was selling well, they go, yeah, we're going to take half of those and just make the 7800 XT, get rid of them.
Yeah, cutting their losses with the 7900 XT, because at a certain point, there's just not enthusiasm for the 7900 XT, and maybe it would be better if you could keep the price somewhat inflated by not having a bunch of shitty models of 7900 XT come out.
Right. And, you know, if I pull up the 7900 XT specs, let's see, we got 315 watt TDP. So maybe what they do too is they just say, you know, making it like a 280 watt TDP or somewhere between there and 300, that will make the board cost a little cheaper. Removing a couple MCDs. Maybe we're removing another 10, 20 bucks, removing another 4 gigabytes of RAM, another 20 bucks. Maybe it is getting to the point where a 7900 XT makes a certain margin at like 750 to 800. And then this can kind of just be like 20% weaker, but also cost $50 to $100 less total. And then we're just going to bite the bullet and make it 600. But what this will allow us to do is we'll have two ways we can divert bad yields. And if we find out, hey, people really like a more efficient 6900 XT for 600, they like that way more than they like a $800 overclock 6950 XT. Like if they find that this happens, guys, they can just say, yeah, we're going to disable these into that. That happens with a lot of those 6-core models, actually, with Zen Plus.
Oh, yeah.
Almost none of those yields had to be 6 cores with Zen Plus, but they just said, well, that's the model that's selling, so we're going to cut the cores down and whatever, bundle a cheaper cooler with it. So it just gives AMD some flexibility to divert into two different price points, and one of them costs $50 less to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I suppose that makes sense. And then hopefully with Navi 32, we get a bunch of a bunch of decently priced mid-range GPUs.
Yeah, but otherwise, guys, I just got to say too, again, I guess maybe they use Navi 32 for the 7800 XT. And if they do, I would suggest they fix something in Navi 32. But from what we've seen so far, Phoenix and Navi 33 don't 60 compute units. Okay. Phoenix and Navi, which remember the 6800 XT had 72.
Yeah.
So far, Phoenix and Navi 33 maybe seem a little better than Navi 31, relatively speaking, but not much. And I think there's just no way around it. You look at, like, what is it? 32, I think, compute units. And let me just double check that then. RX6. Yeah, so look, guys, it's a smaller die size, so that's impressive. But ultimately, the 7600 is like 5 to 10% stronger than a 6650 XT with the same amount of compute units. Mm-hmm. But I guess it's smaller, so you might want to factor that in. But no matter how you dice it, it just seems like RDNA 3 is about 20% better per compute unit. Some would argue if I'm being generous. And so if that's true, I don't know how Navi 32 outperforms the 6800 XT with 60 compute units. It won't. It's going to be at best the same performance. And therefore, that would be better as the 7800, which would be fine if they just made no 7800 XT, but we're seeing registers for a 7800 XT. So that is where I continue to have the opinion of what I said, by the way, months ago, that it seems like Navi 31 might be used for the 7800 XT.
Yeah, I mean, all roads seem to be pointing to that, so at this point.
But anyways, let us now move on to story number 4. For the first half of this year, have you felt like a dog chasing its tail as you scour CD websites and eBay to find any place you can get reasonably priced Microsoft products? Well, you don't need to do that anymore. Just go to cdkeyoffer.com, the best place to get Microsoft operating systems, Office products, select games, and even some gaming hardware peripherals for reasonable prices. And they're always doing special promotions. Right now, in fact, they are doing their mid-year sales event that you're not going to want to miss. So whether you're looking for Steam, EA, Uplay, or PlayStation keys, or of course Microsoft products or gaming peripherals, support Moore's Law is Dead by using the offer code BrokenSilicon for 25% off all Microsoft products and Die Shrink for 3% off everything else on the website. Support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting one of our best long-term sponsors, cdkeyoffer.com, today. AMD details Bergamo, Zen 4C, and MI300 at their AI and data center technology premiere. Quoting here from AnandTech, a rather large post, but I think this is a good summary of it all. On June 13th, AMD finally announced their long-awaited high-density Bergamo server CPUs. These are based on AMD's density-optimized Zen 4C architecture. The new EPYC chips offer up to 128 CPU cores, 32 more cores than AMD's current flagship Genoa. And AMD actually first teased Bergamo and Zen 4C over 18 months ago, outlining their plans to deliver a higher-density EPYC CPU destined particularly for the cloud computing market. The Zen 4C cores will use the same ISA as AMD's regular Zen 4 architecture, making both sets of architectures fully ISA compatible and with the same IPC, but one of them functions with a denser design. Despite these density-focused improvements, Bergamo is still a hefty chip overall, though, in regards to the total number of transistors in use. A fully kitted-out chip is comprised of 82 billion transistors, down from the roughly 90 billion transistors in a full Genoa chip, which means it actually probably costs less to make than Genoa, guys. Which, accounting for the larger number of CPU cores available with Bergamo, works out to a single Zen 4C core being about 68% the transistor count of a Zen 4 core when amortized over the entire transistor count of the chip. The higher core counts and less aggressive clock speeds make the resulting chips on a core-for-core basis more energy efficient than Genoa, which for AMD's target market is a huge consideration, given that power is one of their greatest ongoing costs. As part of today's presentation, AMD is touting that a 2.7 times improvement in energy efficiency is what you would see for a Bergamo chip over Sapphire Rapids. Now, moving from Zen to CDNA, AMD also offered an update on the status of their nearly finished AMD Instinct MI300 accelerator family, the company's next-generation HPC class processors, which use Zen 4 CPU cores and CDNA 3 GPU cores on a single package, have now become a multi-SKU family of XPUs. The previously announced 128GB MI300 APU, first leaked by Moore's Law is dead, by the way, everybody, which is now being called the MI300A, offers the design AMD has already detailed, which is 24 Zen 4 cores, 128 gigabytes of HBM3 on a complex 5 plus 6 nanometer tile design. However, they have now also announced a more AI and compute-focused chip dubbed the MI300X, first leaked by Adora TV, that uses just CDNA 3 GPU tiles rather than a mix of GPU and CPU tiles, making it a pure high-performance GPU paired with 192 gigabytes of memory aimed squarely at large language models market. The MI300X is designed for customers who need all the memory capacity they can get to run the largest of models. With these announcements, AMD has solidified that they're years ahead of Intel in traditional multi-core server performance, and that they're doing a flexible XPU design at least 3 years before their rival Intel. Whereas Intel has now scrapped their combined GPU and CPU Falcon Shores products for a pure GPU Falcon Shores, AMD is now slated to offer a flexible GPU CPU family by the end of this year, years before Intel, despite Intel, I think, arguably announcing that crap before them. However, AMD undoubtedly wishes they had MI300 sooner, and that is because demand for AI accelerators has been through the roof for much of the past year, and MI300s will be AMD's first opportunity to make a significant play for the market. Although AMD seems behind NVIDIA, their investors are still undoubtedly hoping MI300 will become AMD's versions of a license to print money for the AI boom by the end of the year, that Team Green has already secured the ability to do already. All right, Dan, there was that big AI premiere. That's my write-up from AnandTech of the whole thing. What are your thoughts?
I mean, hopefully the AI boom works out because for AMD, because yeah, they're pushing into it now at an almost awkward point where like NVIDIA has secured so many contracts for doing AI that I'm a bit worried this is just going to come to the market a little bit late. Although if this thing goes for like 5-10 years, I guess they'll be rolling in money.
Right, that's something I've discussed with you, and something I said both on the recent Loose Ends and in that Intel is an AMD's rear view mirror video. Like it, if your argument is that NVIDIA should be worth over $1 trillion because they're about to make heaps of money for this many years because they're ahead and they have the right product, well, if that's assuming this will be a booming segment that's wildly out of control in money for years. If it's going to go on for years, AMD has really impressive chiplet hardware that should be very competitive with NVIDIA. So if you're betting on the market getting that big, you'd be an idiot to not assume AMD is going to at least take a lot of the hyperscaler part of it. And if you don't think that, then that means you think NVIDIA is just shifting their capacity because they have to after the blockchain bust into AI short term, which if that does happen,
well,
AMD missed the boat. Then that was a chance to save their financials this year in a way NVIDIA did.
I mean, NVIDIA's architectures are also, for the past few years, have been pivoting hard into AI. So I'd be surprised if they both made that miscalculation. I mean, there's going to be a huge crash in the market at some point, even though NVIDIA has secured some massive contracts for their Hopper GPUs that I've seen. But I don't know. This is a big bet I think this is more of a gamble for AMD that they, just based on where the market is right now, they kind of have to make. But the one thing that worries me with all of these booms and busts is a bunch of companies want AI hardware right now, but it hasn't been monetized, the software, in that well yet in a lot of ways. So there's like a lot of AI research going on right now. There's all these large language models that are coming out that I don't quite understand how they're making money. I mean, they'll figure out how to monetize it eventually, I'm sure. But
someone will, but not all of them.
It does always worry me when it's like you see investors like buying into a technology simply because it's a new technology, even though its use case isn't incredibly clear at this point.
Right. And it's not to say that there aren't important use cases. I already think the AI management email secretary thing, you know, throwing together drafts of PowerPoints for you stuff, that seems like a legit thing here. And I think the idealization, I think is what they're calling it now to a lot of developers, to me, of art. So they make the final art that's not copyrighted by anyone else and has their own unique takes on it. But maybe they use AI to generate a bunch of concepts to give them an idea before they start work. Oh yeah, I think that's useful. But, you know, when the dot-com bubble burst, it's not because the internet wasn't going to be this magnitude shifting thing. It's just 80 to 90% of the use cases were either ahead of their time or bullshit. And 10% of the people made a killing. And a lot of those companies are still around and doing better than ever. But 90% of the money spent might have been a waste back then.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's hard to... I think it's hard to imagine that something similar to that doesn't happen. Maybe
it's almost inevitable it's going to.
Yeah.
And so if you assume that, who's going to be the winners, who's going to be the losers of that bubble?
Well, depending on how the bubble lasts, NVIDIA is clearly a winner for it, and AMD could be a winner for it. So I think if this goes on for 5 years, I think the hardware manufacturers are going to make a killing, even if they're selling products to a bunch of stupid companies that haven't thought out what they're doing with AI. I mean, it really doesn't matter to AMD or NVIDIA what they're doing with they're
buying
GPUs
it right
as
now.
long as they buy them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that gets us to why I made that video. Intel's in AMD's rearview mirror, but NVIDIA isn't. From where I'm sitting, Intel's going to have an answer to MI300 and everything NVIDIA has in 3 or 4 years, probably right when the bubble bursts.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at where Intel is right now, it does increasingly feel like the only competitive place they're in is consumer CPUs. And everywhere else,
and that's a market that's not that reliable, nor as big as like just hyperscalers.
Yeah, and yeah, when it comes to server hyperscaling, cloud, AI, GPUs, it's either AMD or NVIDIA that's dominant in any of those.
Or some other custom competitor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because there's a thing that we always... Yeah, there's a thing we always forget about there. There's like, oh, there's this company that nobody cares about that no consumer cares about that makes a killing in this one specific use case.
Yeah.
And then they're competitive. Intel is competitive against AMD in consumer CPUs, but I think it's important to emphasize competitive. They're not winning. They're just they're I think on relatively equal footing right now.
In performance, but not in manufacturing cost nor efficiency, which is 2/3 of the fight, right?
Well, it's 2/3 of the fight, and I think there's still some consumer goodwill from certain people at Intel that's driving people to buy Intel CPUs. But
right, yeah, because it's like there's the raw performance, then there's the amount of energy to get that performance, then there's what you can charge for that performance. And so far, AMD has better efficiency. They're selling 170-watt CPUs against Intel's 300-watt plus CPUs. And then they have the ability to make them for less money. The only reason they cost competitive with Intel is because they choose to. They could be less. So it's kind of a disaster in that department. And, you know, I was talking to one of the contributors, Karen Sugata, who pointed out, you know, everyone talks about how entrenched Intel is in their part of the market in server, which they are. Maybe 40% is never going to switch, but that's standard server customer entrenched people. They're not
growing. The growing markets are AI and hyperscaler and cloud. And that's what AMD's doing way better.
Yeah.
So that explains more why AMD is going to take more and more of that market as well. And it's just, I don't know, it's just, at least right now, NVIDIA's winning. If this bubble goes on for a while, you could see AMD catching up and getting some really big contracts. But with Intel, I just go, I don't know, guys. It looks bad. It looks like not only are they in a losing war of attrition in client and other places, but in server, it's a hard battle for them to keep fighting. And then in AI, and then in all of the new stuff like AI, they're just late to the party again, just like they were with cell phones, just like it gets just on and on and on.
Yeah, I mean, the only hope is if Intel, for Intel, is if they arrive late to the party, hopefully they can sell their CPUs or whatever, their processors, I'll just call them at this point. Hopefully they can sell them at a reasonable price because, I mean, maybe they're late to the market, but if they offer a good price at the time, some people will still buy it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, at least that's the bet they're clearly making at the end of next year because they've bought up tons of TSMC and prepared a ton of their own capacity for it. But let us now, though, on another note, move on, or actually on a similar note, move on to story number 5. Moore's Law is Dead drops several Turin AI leaks. One thing AMD did not reveal last week at their data center technology premiere was anything having to do officially with Zen 5. But don't worry, this channel had you covered. While Tom was on break and Dan was dying from COVID, the following was leaked. Turin AI allows customers to use up to 6 AI chiplets, each one instead of a Zen 5 chiplet on that EPYC SoC. What this means is a customer can decide to have half of the performance of an H100 included in a thin APU-like product that doesn't require a PCIe card, or they can use less AI chiplets to get exactly what they need for a certain accelerator workload. Additionally, leaked benchmarks from this channel show that AMD expects a Turin CPU with a single AI chiplet to outperform Sapphire Rapids and accelerator workloads while destroying its CPU performance, because everyone, I believe that would mean at least 64 Zen 5 cores versus 60 Sapphire Rapids cores. That's not going to be a competition. And also, they think, at least right now, AMD is proposing internally that 2 AI chiplets in a Zen 5 Turin CPU should be able to beat a Granite Rapids 86 core or 84 core, actually, in their slides, assuming Intel disables 2 cores. So keep that in mind as well, because everyone talks about how Granite Rapids goes up to at least 120 cores. Right, that's the AP bigger socket that comes out late next year, not around Turin, guys. So, at the end of the day, AMD, and if we're talking about what do I think is going to win, 84 Redwood Plus Cove cores, or maybe 64 Turin cores. I know 128 is going to crush that, but I don't know. Zen 5 versus Redwood Cove Plus. I think Zen 5 is going to have a slight IPC advantage, probably boost higher. There's a chance they may just beat Granite Rapids at everything too with Turin AI, and then have a 128 core offering for standard workloads, Vcache models, and a 192 core model for cloud customers.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like a bad year again next year for Intel in server, client, and AI. Dan, what are your thoughts?
I mean, Turin sounds like if it is that fully like customizable, and that's going to be an offering that, depending on like how small of a server blade they can make, that could beat out certain like H100 customers.
Because some of them don't need that much compute. They just need the ability to run these types of AI workloads and then have a ton of RAM. And then if you can make it half as big, use half the energy of an H100 chip, which each H100 chip uses like 700 watts, by the way, guys. Yeah, a lot of people might go for that.
And then that would be what? If you had 6 AI chiplets, that would be 80 cores, right? Something like that.
I honestly don't know. All I know is I've seen benchmarks with 64 core models. I don't know why it's limited to up to 6 in the documentation I saw. I don't know if that means that each AI chiplet takes up 2 8-core CCDs. I don't know. Or 16 core even. Maybe Turin AI is just using Zen 4 Zen 5C, I think I might have even heard. I don't know. I think that's actually plausible, by the way, that what I saw with one of the benchmarks was maybe like 2 AI chiplets, and each one is a Zen 5C chiplet that's bigger than a Zen 4 chiplet. I don't know. It's hard for me to say.
Yeah.
But it goes up to 6, which is about half the performance of H100.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's just to say it gives them the AI capability on an APU to not quite be as strong as like what their dedicated GPUs will are going to have in the future, but you get a strong hybrid between CPU and the AI performance in hopefully a small package. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I don't know. It to me seems hopefully on the same vein of what we were talking about in the previous story. AMD seems to be betting pretty hard on AI over the next 2 years. So at every level of performance. So hopefully it works out for them. Although I do think something like this is more of a safe bet because this isn't going all in on AI computing.
No, NVIDIA seems much more to be going all in on AI. In fact, I've seen people argue, and I think somewhat justifiably, they don't even make graphics cards anymore anyways. They make AI cards and then find a way to use it to make graphics.
Oh, I mean, there's definitely a strong argument for that. Yeah.
Bullethead writes in and asks, has AMD put any thought into a prosumer Zen 5C or Zen 5, I'm sorry, CPU with an 8-core CCD and an AI engine chiplet instead of dual 8-core CCDs on AM5? I would expect the best bins of the AI engine chiplets in such a product, but I feel like it would at least be useful to anyone trying to run a local AI instance of Stable Diffusion or a smaller LLM for coding. Yeah, well, and at a minimum, they could probably make a custom IO die, squeeze some stuff out, and put like a 16-core Zen 5C with an AI engine chiplet. That might be a really interesting like developer board for universities.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, am I wrong? Isn't that kind of similar to what Phoenix is? Or I actually don't know how much space the AI engine takes up on Phoenix. So
it's a very small amount of space.
Okay, so it's not really it's not a dedicated chip.
Well, my memory, I leaked this, so let me just open up. Right, Strix Point, I think Phoenix is like 12 tops. I think Strix Point is aiming for 20 tops based on my documentation and 40 tops for Strix Halo. Each one of these AI engine chiplets, Dan, if you'll remember from what we are looking at here today, is about 250 to 300 tops. So I mean, we're talking about each one of these AI engine chiplets being
an order of magnitude.
Yeah, I mean,
stronger.
We're 10 to 20 times stronger than what's in the APUs. From what I've heard, the APUs can do everything an AI chip can. It's just not meant to be crazy strong. Just be able to do it to, do things 10 times like 1,000 times faster than a GPU. Not do things remotely as fast as a real AI card.
Okay. I mean, so yeah, I suppose then if they dedicating an entire AI engine chiplet would be interesting if that's possible. Although I don't know if it is based on what you said about like we don't really know how much space an AI engine takes up at this point.
Yeah. Well, except that it's a very small amount of space on Phoenix. And I would also say to Bullethead, I think it would make far more sense to just slightly update the IO die for Granite Ridge and just give it the Phoenix AI engine. Like just put that on the IO die or something. Although up until now, I really don't have any proof they're doing that because everything I've seen is the same amount of PCIe lanes. Everything I've seen is like some reductions in capabilities. So I think it would make sense. Like if you're going to have Phoenix have an AI engine and then you're going to launch Strix Point with an AI engine, are you really then going to launch Zen 5 to AM5 using literally the same IO die? Wouldn't you want to at least update that to like 2 RDNA 3 plus compute units and an AI engine on there? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's just not worth the money because no one would use it on desktop. I don't know, but that's what I would think.
I mean, I imagine there will be a use for it on a desktop. So eventually, at least
then you can argue like your PC is not going to fall behind in all of these capabilities. But
yeah.
QH Freddy writes in, would Vcache have much use on Bergamo or other compact core parts? Is it worth the design effort? Honestly, I'm not sure it would make sense. I mean, Bergamo seems to accomplish the same IPC as Genoa while having less cache. So for the things it's going to be used for, I don't know why you'd use Vcache. Remember, I don't think that, I guess I don't know. I don't know if that Vcache die would easily fit on a Bergamo die. Remember, those Zen 4C chiplets are a different shape. So would they have to design a custom Vcache chip for that? Would those people just be using Genoa X anyways? I don't know. I don't think it really makes sense. And then if you think of it from a consumer standpoint, is a gamer going to choose an 8-core at 5 gigahertz with Vcache or a 16-core at 3 gigahertz with Vcache? I think we know what gamers are going to choose, right?
The 16-core. No.
Yeah.
The 8-core, obviously. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It seems to me like it's doing it's reducing die size and then per core. I mean, size per core, and then re-adding on with a different tile. It seems, I don't know, like kind of like a backwards way of doing it, where AMD, I think, is kind of moving to just having 3 different types of cores that are broadly similar. They just have different amounts of cache on them.
Right, and hit different clock speeds.
Yeah.
And so it kind of seems like a similar thing's going on with Zen 5, except more of the APUs will have like a unified 4 big and 8 little, although they're really all big cores. Just one of them is a little more dense, doesn't clock as fast. And I think Zen 6 is when they're going to consider that. But I think you'd want to like build an architecture fundamentally from the ground up. Like Zen 1 through Zen 4 are all iterating into a better version of the same thing. And then Zen 5 is kind of like Zen 3 in that it redoes a lot of the stuff, but it's still like fundamentally steps forward. I think if you were going to have tiny cores that can have cache put on them, you're just going to want to do that from the ground up for all of the benefits an IPC you could get if it was solely built to do that. That's what I think Zen 6 is going to do. But not yet. Not now. Not Bergamo. All right. Now, let us then move on to story number 6, AMD R5 5600X3D rumors. Over the past week, several rumors have appeared detailing the potential launch of an R5 5600X3D for AM4. This would be a Zen 3-based 6-core SKU that leverages the full layer of Vcache that the 5800X3D also uses for potentially very similar gaming performance to that legendary 5800X3D in many scenarios. However, one would have to ask, what would this cost, or really what should this be priced at? After all, the 5800X3D is currently selling for around $250 to $300 in the do-it-yourself market. So should the 5800X3D be $200 or 5600X3D be $200? Many people also then forget that the Zen 4-based R5 7600 is currently already close to $200, and it comes with a cooler and actually trades blows with the 5800X3D. So, well, according to yours truly, and first leaked in the recent loose ends, the 5600X3D indeed sounds real, according to my sources, but it also sounds like it's mostly meant for OEMs. Now, that's not to say that it won't launch to do-it-yourself eventually, nor that AMD may change their minds entirely either way, just not launching it or bringing it to do-it-yourself. But that does not make that much sense to me. To me, it makes sense to launch a 5600X3D, which again, let's remember, would probably be the same price and performance as the already out 7600 if it's to give to OEMs to get rid of their AM4 motherboards, because they need to do something to help OEMs use AMD motherboards while Intel ships nearly free Alder Lake i5s because of their oversupply. That is what I believe is going on with the 5600X3D. At a minimum, though, it does exist, guys. It's out there.
Yeah, I don't. This is a kind of weird story to me, because it's how much cheaper could they get a 5600X3D? Like if they're manufacturing it now and not just clearing out old stock, which is what I would assume this would have to be. How much cheaper could they make a 5600X3D than a 7600 or something?
I think it'd have to be $199.
I was going to say, for this to come out, I would want it to be below $200, maybe even $180
to directly compete with budget 13th gen 6-core i5s.
Yeah, because that's presumably what this would be for. And I'm not opposed to them continuing to like sell Zen 3 as their budget option. It just seems odd to release a 5600X3D now, because I just don't know how much cheaper it would be to like make than something like cheaper Zen 4 CPU.
I don't think it's much cheaper to make at all. I just think they've stockpiled the worst 6-core X3D yields they have left from Milan X, and this is how they get rid of AM4 motherboards at OEMs. Honestly, that's what I think this is. Could it come to do it yourself? I guess, but then it would have to be $200 for me to really consider getting it all. And at $200, it's not a really exciting product for AMD or anyone, I think.
No, I mean, it would be exciting if they could get it for like put it out for like $160 or something, but
yeah,
I wouldn't bet money on that.
Yeah, and again, I think people forget this. The 7600 is the same performance anyways, guys. In fact, it might beat the 6-core. It already is the same performance as a 5800 X3D. It might actually beat the 5600 X3D, and that's already about $200. So yeah, they're launching the same performance as what you can get now on AM5 for the same money, but I guess if you have an AM4 motherboard, you don't need to get a new one. That's an option, but it's not. To me, this has to. It can't just be do it yourself. It's probably meant for OEMs, like I'm told. That just makes sense to me.
Yeah, because once again, unless they were able to do it for an absurd price, no DIYer would buy this.
Yeah.
Well, not many DIYers would buy it.
All right. Well, now let us shift gears to story number 7. This summer, Jesse's excited to lay back and, well, if we are being honest, try to get some of my friends and family to give them their hamburgers, hot dogs, and noodles while we're making dinner and having cookouts. Which, honestly, I don't think she even really cares that much about which piece of human food she gets, whether it's healthy or not. But that's where me and her differ, because I do care. The older I get, the more I notice the healthier I eat, the better I feel, and that's why I eat Vite Ramen. This piece of content is brought to you by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers a ton of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, and the Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy, microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break, whether at the office or working from home. Click on the link in the description and use the offer code BROKENSILICON to save 10% off a variety of different products, including special bundles just for Moore's Law Dead fans, raw nudes if you want to make up your own recipe with these noodles, and other food products and cooking utensils as well. And remember that no matter what you get from Vite Ramen, if you use the link in the description and the offer code, you are supporting Moore's Law is Dead, in addition to supporting this plucky and rapidly growing company. So support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting Vite Ramen today. Intel 14th Gen Ultra updates. Well, it seems like various websites are now finally confirming what Moore's Law is Dead leaked months ago, that the Ultra branding for Meteor Lake is being introduced in order to differentiate mobile Raptor Lake Refresh and mobile Meteor Lake products that are going to offer similar performance and core counts, but Meteor Lake has significantly better efficiency, new AI capabilities, and slightly better performance in some scenarios. Thus, it's the Ultra version of Raptor Lake Refresh. Indeed, specifically, Video Cards has recently shared a picture of mobility products branding, and on the recent loose ends, yours truly confirmed Intel may even be dropping the I and i7 in lieu of saying either Ultra 7 or Core 7 moving forward. The only odd thing about this is that there are currently also rumors out there saying that Intel may do this on mobile, but keep the I for i9 14900K and desktop variants, but not in the mobility variants, which I guess is possible, but that at least seems weird to me, and I can't confirm anyone I've talked to says that's going to happen. Either way, though, what I would say is it's clear that the I branding is planned to be obsolete by the time Arrow Lake comes out.
Well, I'm glad Intel isn't making their marketing confusing, Tom, because this sounds like it will be a nightmare until they fully transition to just doing. I don't know how they want to. Do they just want to go back to Core 7? I mean, or like the core marketing that they had before they introduced the i7 stuff? Because I don't want there to be a world where they distinguish between Ultra and Core for down their product stack, because that just sounds obnoxious to me.
I think it's meant to be a temporary thing, you know, which means they'll just go to all Ultra in the future or something. Maybe not. I don't know. I don't get it. You know, I think you might do Ultra 7 and then call it U7 in the future. I don't like how that sounds really, though. I don't know. I think maybe just always leaving Ultra there is like because Lunar Lake coming, I've heard, is a similar thing. Like Lunar Lake's supposed to be an ultra efficient kind of like Cougar Cove early, lower core count though, version of what they will have out with like Arrow Lake at the same time or something, if I'm remembering correctly. So there might always be this thing where they're having like half steps. And, you know, Meteor Lake uses Intel 4. And then Intel 3 is the improved version. Then 18A is the improved version of 20. That's really meant for all types of products, not just one tile, and so on and so forth. So they're kind of doing this leapfrogging technology thing too. So there might be multiple instances in the next 5 years where Intel has like half-step architectures that have the next-gen IPC, but not higher clock speeds and core count. Maybe this would make sense then, but if you're going to do that, I don't know why you get rid of I would get rid of the word core.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if Intel is going to keep moving into this world where I guess we don't know exactly how all of these architectures are going to shake out over the next 4 or 5 years, maybe Intel is going to continually have more architectures or like half-step architectures coming out concurrently with new architectures like Meteor Lake and Raptor Lake Refresh will how they'll coexist. Who knows? And I guess in that world, it would make sense to have a way to differentiate between the two architectures.
Now, this is the version that costs more, but is on a cutting edge node and has a new engine in it or something.
Yeah.
That's why you get this. But again, you know, me and you talked about this. So the reason they want to drop I is Meteor Lake is the start of their client tiled, ultra efficient architectures. And I can't help but go, if that's what you're going to do, though, why would you not drop Core? Because I sounds old. Well, Core is from fucking Core
20 years ago.
Right? Like, nothing sounds older than Core. And it's also a more generic term. Core. I know anyone in this space understands Core, Core Duo, Core Extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But to a layman, Core, everyone is Cores. Intel Core. What do you mean Core? CPU Core. Why would you not keep I7 and then Ultra 7? You can put U9 for this is the Ultra variant, but removing Core is just, I mean, keeping Core and calling it Core 7, if that's what they actually do, is just bizarre to me.
Yeah, it also kind of just sounds stupid and is confusing because it kind of sounds like they're calling it a 7 core.
Oh yeah, God, Core 7, yeah.
Whatever, though, Intel. I don't know what you're doing with your branding right now. This is always what happens though when a company is in a rough spot. Like remember when AMD wasn't doing super well and they were like, well, I think the way we reinvigorate Radeon is by changing the branding every 2 years.
Yeah, well, they went HD 7970 to R9 290, R9 390, RX 480, RX 5700X. Good Lord, AMD, stop changing the names of your graphics cards. But yeah, and you know, the start of that too is, yeah, like, because Intel, like, you would think, you know what you should do on laptop is you're still going to have the i9 24-core Extreme variants of Raptor Lake R. Sure, that's your 24-core desktop replacement CPU. But would it really be so bad, Intel, if you just clocked Raptor Lake R a little lower for less performance, but also not close to Meteor Lake efficiency, but significantly better efficiency than last gen, and you just said, hey, i9 6+8, Meteor Lake. I know, and then you just below that is Raptor Lake and so on and so forth. But they're just going to call everything i9s and i7s, but some of them are Ultra. It really reminds me of with Radeon, with the 200 series, R9 290X, R9 290, R9 285, R9 280X, R9 280, R9 270X, R9 270. I mean, good God, everything's a freaking R9 apparently. Or I think maybe 270. Let me see. Did they do that too? I just have to double check because that's crazy. Yes, it was called the R9 270. That's crazy. You're going 2/3 of the lineup's R9, and then to get to R5, you had to go like way down here. It almost feels like what Intel is doing with Ultra 9 and Core 9 is like they just refuse to say, hey, Raptor Lake Refresh isn't that high end.
Yeah, I know. It's dumb. But that does seem to be what happens when a company is in a rough spot. They don't want to acknowledge that any of their parts aren't high end for some reason. Like,
yeah,
which I think ironically does the opposite of the effect they're trying to have, where it makes it sound like everything you make that you brand as your top end is kind of bad.
Yeah.
Whereas then you have something like NVIDIA, who NVIDIA's had been pretty consistent with their branding for graphics cards since like Tesla, right? Like the 200 series. I mean, it's basically been iterating on that since then. And you can say they changed it a little bit once they got to the 20 series, but it's kind of been the same since then.
No, yeah, it has. It's kind of been the same for over a decade, and it's because they just think their brand has power. They're going to launch it. This is the 40, this is the 80, this is the 70. They added a 90 eventually, but for the most part, they keep the 60 is the mid-range. And it's because they're coming from a place of a lot of strength and therefore initiative.
Actually, where they got rid of the 80 for a while. Although I guess it depends on how you think of it at this point. Because they had a lot of 80s come out as their top card besides the Titan for a while.
And the only other thing I could say about this story is, again, 14th gen, Meteor Lake and Raptor Lake. For some reason, everyone argued against us online, Dan, that they were going to do that. Now it's true. And of course, they all apologized.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, they didn't. No one did, of course. But, you know, the only other thing I'd say, too, is I hear Raptor Lake Refresh is ready. Like, they're making it now. Like, he'll be ready Q3. Like, all of this stuff. I don't have exact release dates on my end yet, but at least Raptor Lake Refresh is going to be ready very soon, and Meteor Lake should be ready by Q4. How much volume they'll have, I don't know, but expect to be able to get that 14900K, whether it's an i9 or Core 9, fairly soon, everybody.
Okay.
And I still hear 10 to 20% better than last gen. I guess let me remind everyone that too. Still here, Raptor Lake Refresh isn't just like 2% better. It's 10 to 20% better than Raptor Lake, which is, yeah, I think they might actually hold the crown on desktop then this year, and that'll be that. We'll see. Although they won't be more efficient, that's for sure. All right, let us then move on to story number 8. Apple's new Proton-like tool can run Windows games on a Mac. So quoting from The Verge, if you're hoping to see more Windows games on Mac, then those dreams might finally come true soon. Apple has dropped some big news for game developers at its annual Worldwide Developers Conference this week, making it far easier and quicker to port Windows games to Mac thanks to a Proton-like environment that can translate and run the latest DirectX 12 Windows games on Mac OS, much like how the Steam Deck does it. Apple has created a new game porting toolkit that's similar to what Valve has done. It's powered by source code from Crossover, a Wine-based solution for running Windows games on Mac OS. Apple's tool instantly translates Windows games to run on Mac OS, allowing developers to launch an unmodified version of the Windows game on Mac and then test it before fully porting the game. It translates Intel-based x86 instructions and Windows APIs to Apple Silicon. APIs related to keyboard, mouse, controller input, audio playback, networking, file system even, and DirectX 3 are all translated to the corresponding API to macOS. So yeah, I mean, basically they can just take this, it translates it, and they just have to test it for like a week and make sure it works. However, one of the biggest issues that still needs to be tested by the community, maybe gamers can now run the game, but will they run it well enough to even care? Most won't be optimized through this tool, and there are bound to be performance issues and bugs until developers create their own ports. Reddit users have already got Cyberpunk 2077 up and running on an M1 MacBook Pro, alongside Diablo 4 on an M1 MacBook Pro and Hogwarts Legacy on an M2 Max. The early results look promising despite some obvious performance limitations, but we could also be potential bugs from running games. Yeah, so I don't know. I looked at it. It basically showed these things running worse than Rembrandt, though, I have to say.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I mean, that I don't know how people got them running on this, but on the Mac. But you know, we'll see. I think this is really promising, and if Mac got to a point where it was almost trading blows with PC for the same like theoretical like power that their chips offer, I think for some people that would make Mac a viable place to do PC. Well, yeah, I guess you can call it PC gaming, to do gaming, where it just isn't viable in any meaningful way right now. I doubt this means that Mac will become a full competitor in PC for PC gaming, but I mean, always crossing my fingers that another entrant is going into the market, because that I don't see how that can be detrimental, at least to us, even if it doesn't necessarily offer the best performance.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you're one of those Apple haters, if MacBooks could run games as well as they theoretically should, or at least 90% of them, you know, some of these chips from Apple have really high-end specs and like unified 64 gigabytes of memory.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, if they could, you know, if the latest thing could already perform kind of like a Strix Halo, and you just get it early, but it costs more, but you also get this thin form factor that can game on battery for hours, that's going to bring competition to laptop. I mean, you're not going to get these bullshit gaming laptops that only have an APU and cost $1,500 if a Mac costs the same amount. Like,
Yeah.
this would push down pricing for some of the niche segments on Windows PCs.
Yeah, so I don't know. This is really cool. I mean, I think I think to view it as viable versus PC gaming, and it will always be probably a little bit worse than PC. It needs to get to the same place where, like, at a minimum, where Proton is right now. Which I'm not saying it won't be that. Who knows? Maybe it will release and it will be that good. But
yeah, and then if you just make this tool, you know, because I think it's always like that little bit of effort. It's always going to take some effort, but if you can at least get it to a point where there's that little extra, that's all that it seemed needed to happen to get a lot of Linux games working excellent. A lot of PC games running excellently on Linux. Like, yes, you have people like, I think Borderlands, certainly I know Metro Exit or the Metro series. You know, you have these games, they will just make the Linux version because, I don't know, I guess 4A Games just likes being cool, you know, and they will directly make the game work on Linux and maybe Mac. But we've already seen, like, Valve, I don't even think has sold, I guess, let me Google it and see. So, I mean, it seems like they think it's 1.6 to 4 million, somewhere in that region. This is called 3 million by now. Steam Decks have been sold, which isn't bad, but that's not the tens of millions of MacBooks out there. Yet all they had to do is work with Proton, make it so that 90% of the work is done for the devs. And they just have to sit down, and then you get that little checkbox on the page on Steam that says Steam Deck verified. Let's get that checkbox for at Mac verified. This is probably all that's required for 90% of these developers to make all of their games work on Mac, at least 95% as well as it does on PC in an optimization level. If you could get there, yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Well, that would instantly open up the gaming market to a bunch of Macs, which if you have a Mac and you're gaming, you probably have something else anyways, but that opens up the gaming market to a lot of different people. I don't know why you wouldn't want to check that box. And if enough games do check the box to work on Mac, some people will maybe consider getting Macs instead of PCs, depending on the current environment.
Yeah, and it'd be really cool if I had that option too, because I know Gerard, our audio engineer, has a decent editing PC. I think he has a 4090 now for rendering as well. But he also has a MacBook, both for travel, and so he can edit on the bus if he's on the train in Spain for an hour, he can edit something on battery and it won't die. But he also just says, you know, audio editing on Mac, it's just more stable. There's less bugs. Every now and then, both him and me, we'll render a podcast, or I'll render a video, and there'll just be a weird noise.
Oh, randomly. I know.
It doesn't really happen anymore. I've isolated all of the factors that could make it happen, even though I didn't tell it to make that noise, guys. It was a glitch. And still, like, I hear that just never happens on Mac. Like he says, it's just always stable. There's been times where he just couldn't fix a glitch and just redid his work on Mac. And that would encourage me to maybe consider getting that for editing while we're traveling or something.
Yeah, and if you are like a music producer, which I believe Gerard does producing too. Yeah. So if you were a producer, I just would do my editing on Mac then. Like that.
And then if you told me, hey, now this can run Deep Rock Galactic and play Battlefield in 1080p, sounds good. All right. Let us now move on then to the final wrap up. These are the stories that we don't think deserve a main story, but they're certainly noteworthy enough for us to discuss them. And actually, on that note, didn't deserve a full story, but we'll stay on Apple. Apple M2 Ultra iterates 20% is what I wrote down as the cliff notes for this one. So Apple announced they've announced a lot of things, right? They announced this gaming initiative that we just discussed in story number 8. They announced the Apple Vision Pro, right? Pro or Apple?
Apple, yeah. I think it's Apple Pro Vision or Apple Vision Pro. I keep forgetting.
It is Apple Vision Pro. I just want to make sure I said it right. Everything has to have Pro in it now, doesn't it? They called it their VR device the Apple Vision Pro. Just so everybody knows, a whole 1 hour video is out there about the Apple Vision Pro that me and Dan did. If you are a patron, $2 a month gets you access to that die shrink. So it's a video. It's with pop-ups. It's not just, it's not just a podcast. That's out there if you support us. I didn't really think that was worth discussing on this. We just saved it for a die shrink because it's a little less about gaming, but if you're interested, we made that. Also, Apple introduced the M2 Ultra, and this is yet another 5 nanometer iteration. It's not what they need. It's only 20% better than the previous gen. Some things 10%, some things 40%. So let's just call it 20 to 30% better. Yeah. And the big upgrade's gonna be when they move to 3 nanometer next year, or at the end of this year, actually, maybe I've heard. So it is what it is, and it is interesting to see some benchmarks show the M2 non-Ultra not really being better than Phoenix at a lot of things. Like Apple needs to get to 3 nanometer pretty soon here to keep their advantage.
Yeah, I mean, this is seemingly what their launch cadence they're going to do. They're going to launch probably next year or something, M3 and M3 Pro. Then 6 months after that, there will probably be an M3 Max, and then a little bit after that, an M3 Ultra. And it's not a new architecture from what they released last year, so there's not that much to say about it, right?
Yeah. No, it's just an iterative SoC. There's not much to say. It's powerful. I'm sure it's better than their old Intel Xeon Mac Pros as well.
Yeah.
I guess one notable thing, too, about the M2 Ultra Mac Pro is I guess it basically gets rid of, finally, PCIe graphics cards, and it just has a bunch of slots for super fast SSDs and other cards as well, which is interesting. But I think we always knew they were going to go there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And another thing, we have, what is this here? Momomo US found more evidence of Threadripper Zen 4 coming soon, especially Threadripper Pro, which just backs up what I've been saying, guys. Sounds like it's Threadripper Pro. Sounds like they don't want to have a budget Threadripper soon. And it's progressing, but I think it's at the end of this year. So if you've been wanting a new HEDT from AMD, it's not going to be cheap, and it's not going to be as soon as you probably wanted it to be at the beginning of this year. It's going to be at the end.
It seems to generally be what happens with Threadripper lately. I mean, over time.
Yeah, they might have to change their tune next year once Intel has Granite Rapids, but I think I've heard Granite Rapids is like late next year, or even actually 2025 for HEDT anyway. So what competition? Let's see here. Oh, the RX 6700 seems to be basically sold out. Let me see. I got, a new one appeared from XFX, but I guess I will stand by. It's basically sold out. Like if you look at the 6710 gigabyte cards on the market, there's a new XFX one that popped up in stock again for $280 with $9 shipping I'm seeing here. But the Sapphire model's up in price, and the only other one you can get is the ML LSE and 51 Risk Edition. I don't know what these companies are, so I think it's pretty clear this thing's selling out.
Yeah, that's what we said. If you want a card at this level of performance, the 6700 is there, but it's not going to be there forever. They're clearing the channel.
NVIDIA Beta Driver delivers SSD performance boost in DirectX storage 1.2. Gen 5 now 50% faster than Gen 4, whereas it was like 10% before in some games. So I don't know. I don't know that I have much to say about this, but it is interesting to see. And this is mostly still theoretical. This really isn't a game proving this yet from what I'm seeing, but it does look like direct storage will be maybe finally bringing us some PS5 load times to PC by the end of this year. Is kind of what I'm seeing.
That's what we're always waiting for, right? Is software to catch up to hardware.
Yeah. All right. Now, moving forward here, we actually have quite a lot of Xbox related stories, it turns out, this episode. So let's go step by step here. First of all, Dan, Starfield, 30 frames per second, Digital Foundry saying the demos they're putting out are below 1300p. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a lot worse than I would have expected. I don't know that. I don't know if this is a problem with Xbox's hardware in the future, or if this is just Bethesda being inept. Part of me suspects it's Bethesda being inept.
I'm going to say it's probably mostly that. I think it's a bit of both, but more so the split memory system of the Xbox Series X does not favor Bethesda's always been RAM heavy engine. I mean, look at the difference between, there were some games with the PS360 where those consoles only had half a gig of RAM, where they actually punched above their weight compared to the PCs. Even years after those consoles were out, you had PCs with 4 to 8 gigabytes of RAM. Getting the same graphics as a half gigabyte of RAM console. But, I mean, not Fallout 3. That looked like a PS2 game on that generation. And Bethesda games have always liked tons of RAM, and I just think that's what it is it's not the console for a Bethesda game, relatively speaking, because it just always seems to need more RAM than most games for the graphical performance every gen.
Yeah, I don't know. But it's just...
But it's mostly Bethesda's fault, is what I'm arguing.
Yeah, I know. It's just with Bethesda... Like that's their thing, is they're always bad at making their games work well. Like,
yeah,
I don't know what else to say about them. I mean, I know they're a beloved studio, but Jesus, they need to get some people that don't suck at optimizing games.
Yeah, and I'm just looking through the Digital Foundry stuff. I mean, have you looked at the footage at all? I'm looking at it now. I'm not seeing graphics that look like they should be running 1300p 30 here. These look significantly worse than console games I've played recently.
I mean,
it doesn't look bad, but 30 frames 1300p.
Yeah, it's just...
even for an open world game. I mean, Warzone has these massive multi-kilometer maps with hundreds of players, and it can run on console at runs on PS4 Pro at 60 frames. And they're going to say, well, there's more things going on. Are there?
I don't know. It's just Bethesda. Like, when I first saw Starfield, I was like, oh, Bethesda finally made a game that looks like a modern game. But, like, its graphics aren't crazy compared to other games. They look more modern than they used to, but that's the most I can say.
And I think a lot of people want a higher frame rate option, but guys, I'm sure this is the thing I've seen in so many Fallout games where there's just horribly inconsistent performance depending on where you look. Even stuff that's not on screen isn't properly culled, and you'll look in one direction, and it'll just drop from 60 to 30. I'm sure you remember that from Fallout 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that's what's going on here, and they just wanted a consistent experience. And then also to get to 40 frames locked, which is what I wish they would offer as a 40 frames per second option, which would be, I would argue, acceptable on a console. Yeah, who knows? Maybe they'd have to drop to 1080p to do that. So, maybe that's why they're not. I don't know what else to say. We'll see. This game seemed like it was stuck in development hell. Hopefully it's good, but I will say there's no way in hell I would get this on a console at 30 frames per second. I mean, is this 2008? Come on, guys. And some people will say that's like, oh, why do I hate what? Were you defending 30 frames, you peasant? Come on. Enough with the arguing about it. I'm being harsh by saying 30 frames is ridiculous. It's ridiculous on every console when it happens. Also, there's a 1 terabyte Xbox Series S for $350. Again, I don't think we need a story about this. That's news, though, for gamers. I don't really have a whole lot to say.
Yeah, I would still say get the discless version of the PS5.
For $50 more and triple the performance. Yeah, I don't know. This looks, I mean, look, the Microsoft Activision deal is now dead. I mean, now it's being blocked by the US. It's blocked in the UK. That's the news, is that the US is moving, the FTC is moving to block it in the US. It's done. I think this deal's done. I think me and you called it done a year ago. I think it's done. This isn't happening.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't know how. Like, people discuss it online as if it's still happening. I don't understand how it could still happen at this point.
Yeah. No, I don't either. I mean, and this is before possibly another regulatory body just shows up and blocks it as well. Whether it's, Brazil or Europe takes a second look at it. Guys, I don't think it's happening.
Yeah.
And frankly, when you see what Hellblade has a non-specific 2024 release date, Redfall's been a complete flop, and Starfield runs at 30 frames. I don't know, guys. Like, do you really want Microsoft owning more studios? Like, can we just call spade a spade here?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what I've been talking about this like the entire time we've been freaking running this podcast. It is Microsoft gobbling up studios and how it's not going to go well for most of those studios.
Yeah, I just don't think we expected that aspect of what we said to turn out that right.
Yeah.
Like, we thought it might happen to a certain degree. You agree. It's turning out worse than you expected.
Oh, yeah, it is. And if they would have bought Activision, my assumption is that half of Activision studios would be dead within 10 years. So,
yeah. Yeah, well, looks like that's not going to happen now. And what is it? Oh, and finally, Microsoft signals they're done trying to push games to also run on Xbox One, which, thank God.
Yeah, I have nothing else to say. Like, it's time to retire the Xbox One.
This 1.3 teraflop console with DDR3. Guys, it has DDR3, not 4. It has DDR3, 8 gigabytes of DDR3.
Which, if you were
Jesus,
if you were active in online conversations at the time that this Xbox One came out, that was actually meant it would be better than the GDDR5 on the PS4.
The fanboy arguments get to such insane levels of ineptitude that I don't even know what to say. Which I will say nothing more than. Let us then move on to the the finest and the final reader mails. QH Freddy writes in and he says, will AMD start putting cores on their IO dies like Intel seems to be doing with Meteor Lake? I think I get why they're doing it with Meteor Lake. They've got all of these tiles. It's, some would say, almost overly complex for what it's doing. But, if you can literally turn off the CPU tiles and have 2 tiles on the IO die for idle power savings, that would just be immense power savings. That makes sense for Meteor Lake's design to me. Now, for AMD, it's hard for me to say. I guess... But it's the reason they would do it with Meteor Lake is because it has all of these tiles. But Strix doesn't. So you don't need it. It can already, and I've talked to people at AMD, they're like, oh, we already turn off and power gate parts of the APU already. That's our solution. But, the reason you would put it on an IO die is to entirely turn off everything. Full tile.
Yeah.
So AMD doesn't need to do this for Strix Point. AMD doesn't need to do this for Phoenix, Hawkpoint, all that stuff. All right, well, what about Strix Halo? I guess I could see that one because it uses chiplets for the CPUs. And that's about it, though, because I don't know. Do you really think Fire Range needs that? Is that it gonna be put in the efficient laptops? Maybe. I mean, I guess if it just gained you 4 hours of battery life in typical usage, that'd be worth it. But I kind of only see this for Strix Halo.
Well, will the Strix Halo IO die be used in different parts? Because if it is, if they want to continue using the same IO die for multiple parts, I don't know. I feel like it would make sense to not have those 2 extra cores on them, possibly. Yeah.
Well, it depends, too, because Intel has these smaller cores, although they're really not much more efficient than like Zen 2 in area usage. So the question is how AMD would do it. Can they take a single Zen 5 core, Zen 5C core, and put that on the IO die and just hard design that out? Maybe. And if they can with hyperthreading, maybe that'd be a good option. But unless they're going to spend the design money to do that, I just only really see that being useful for Strix Halo. I don't think Fire Range is meant for efficiency. It's desktop replacement. Don't worry about it. And I think their monolithic chips basically already do this, guys. The only reason you do it is because you have a bunch of tiles to turn off the tiles. and Strix Halo is the only one where that makes sense. So I guess I could see it for that, but I wouldn't put money on it happening right away because half of their stuff's still monolithic anyways. Carrie No Sugata writes in and asks, will 2024 be the year of the APUs? Why isn't this working? Come on. There we go. AMD has been pushing APUs for a long time, but they're mostly used in cheap, thin and light laptops or in a combination with a discrete GPU. They've not really come into their own yet, but I suspect with better Phoenix laptops this year, and especially Meteor Lake, we're going to start seeing this surge of APUs for low-end gaming laptops as well. 2024, this will become mainstream with Strix Point, Strix Halo, and Arrow Lake. I guess the way I'm going to choose to address Carrie's question here is not if it's going to be the year of APUs. Look, Meteor Lake launches at the end of this year, followed by Strix Point, Strix Halo, Hawk Point, and Arrow Lake. So yeah, I think next year is the year of the APUs. The interesting thing he touches on, Dan, do you think we'll see a gaming laptop come from HP, like the budget Omen line, and it is just an APU? Do you think they would actually do that?
AMD has been advertising their APUs for that use for forever now, and they never really use it except in like these weird I don't know what you want to call like Mini's PC forum, right? That's what it's called. Yeah, I don't know what you want to call
PCs or handhelds.
Yeah, like they've been used for that now for a while for these like kind of niche like NUC makers, but they just haven't reached laptop for some reason. And I think Phoenix is the first time you can truly say like Phoenix is a good low end gaming GPU. I mean, has a good low end iGPU. And with Strix Point, I think it's just undeniable that has to be one of the use cases Strix Point will go into is low end gaming laptops. And I mean, Strix Halo, based on those numbers, Strix Halo should be, frankly, a mid-range. Yeah, should be a mid-range GPU. I don't understand how it couldn't be that reality next year. Like, there's no way AMD is making Strix Halo with the intention of pairing that with discrete GPUs. There's no way.
Well, no. And well, let me look here though. I know, what is it? The Lenovo Legion gaming laptops. Remember we had one of those with Ivy Bridge?
Mm-hmm.
Let me just look at what their options are for this. Because I'm curious because I think we got ours with I believe it had a 750M, a GTX 750M, and a quad core Ivy Bridge. We got it for like $700 when we went to college or something.
Yeah.
So, all right, oh man, let me see if I can even organize this remotely whatsoever. All right, we got Omen laptops. So they get down to, let's just sort by lowest price. We got, all right, $850, and I'm guessing 3050. Yep. So for $850, they give you a 12 core 16 thread. So what is that? 8? Yeah, so like 4 plus 8 or something, or 6 plus 4 probably. 6 plus 4 probably. So they have an i5 6 plus 4 and an RTX 3050 laptop GPU. It says 6 gigabytes. Is that correct? Is there? Oh, there's 6 gigabyte 3050s. Okay. Well, so there you go. That's $850. Now, Strix Point will have for the same performance as a 3050 next year. I mean, I don't know what's cheaper, including a 3050 in there with it, or just giving it 32 gigs of RAM. And then you can also market it as 32 gigs of RAM gaming for like 4 or 6 hours and make it $750, $700. Do you think they're actually going to do that though? Omen gaming laptop, just Strix Point in it for like $700. Would they actually do that?
I just don't see. I guess you can see how Strix Point is kind of just an iteration on Phoenix, but it feels like an iteration that it gets to the point where,
like, about as strong as a 3050 now. And yeah, granted, there's a 4050 that's way stronger than that, but it costs like $1,200 laptops.
Yeah, it gets to the point where I have to imagine their intention is to try to pair. I imagine they're going to try to pair Strix Point with some lower end gaming laptops. Mm-hmm. because it's at a point where Strix Point is almost awkward to pair it with a discrete GPU. And I
Unless
think
it's way stronger.
Yeah, but I think...
But even then, you'd almost rather use Hawk Point, right? Yeah.
Or you would rather have like a Dragon Range or the follow-up to Dragon Range. I can't remember what that's called right now. Rather than pairing that with Strix Point.
Yeah. Yeah, Fire Range. Yeah.
Fire Range, yeah.
Like, if you're going to do that, you might as well just use Fire Range and give it... Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see if they actually do that, Kari no Sugata, but that's the type of thing I'm going to be looking for getting next year. You know, I got a 2060 Comet Lake laptop right now. I just want 64 gigabytes of unified RAM, 12 cores for editing and work. And then if it stays roughly 2060 performance, I don't care if it means I can do everything now without being plugged in. I mean, it's comical. I was actually downstairs today and I pulled up Minecraft quick just so I wanted to see what the last map I played was. I was just curious. And when I opened it, it was running at like 10 frames a second. It's like, oh yeah, it's not plugged in. And it's like, I get that you'll get a performance loss not plugged in almost always, but this like 4-fold drop is absurd that you see in some applications. And I'm just tired of it. Amiable Chief writes in and says, Tom, if powerful APUs from AMD and apathy from NVIDIA are going to ring in the death knell for low-end discrete GPUs, what do you see happening with the lower quality silicon that used to pass off as low-end? I mean, they're just not going to make the lowest end ones, guys. You know, every hard design costs millions of dollars designing, validating it. People just seem to shit on them nowadays anyways. So what's the point in making the low end die? There's still going to be low end cards. They're just probably going to start at like 250 or higher forever now. And they're probably only going to make one every other generation. I mean, you're going to see stuff like the 7600, but that's it. I don't think there's really a point in 7400 and probably not 7500 XT stuff anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The 7500 XT, if that comes out, I think it's just going to be a repeat of the 6500 XT, maybe a little stronger.
There'll probably be a 6 gigabyte version of the 7600 for $200.
So, I mean, maybe that will come out, but like, I feel like we've been talking about this since the idea of APUs like has existed, that eventually they're going to overtake the low end market. And it seems like it kind of just happened in reverse, where the low end GPU market kind of became obsolete. And
because of how shitty it was and how unprofitable it was to design them.
Yeah, and now hopefully things like Strix Point and Strix Halo or whatever iterates after that will come to desktop, and that will replace the low end market.
Not Strix Halo, but you mean after Strix Point.
Yeah, you're right. After Strix Point, hopefully the follow-up to that will come in, and that will occupy the low end market. And discrete GPUs might just eventually start at being essentially mid-range most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think. And so, you know, what's going to happen to low quality silicon? They're just not going to make it. That's what it comes down to. And the lowest yields of Navi 33 and Navi 43, which I don't think there's any plans for a 34 or a 44 based on people I've talked to. You know, there's just not going to be a four. There would just be a 3, and it's going to probably stop at the $300 mark. And if AMD, they'd probably like to design it so that they kind of start at $350. QH Freddy writes in and asks, I don't really understand how AMD thinks it's going to be lambasted by the press for selling Strix APUs on AM5 according to CPU rather than GPU performance. If anything, the reviews are more likely to be negative if they push up the price based on the iGPU. Good, Freddy, I think you misunderstood what I was saying in the Strix Zen 5 Strix 12-core 8900G video I put out while I was on break, right? I'm not saying because it has an iGPU, they're going to make it cost more. I'm saying it's going to cost as much to make as an 8900X, so they're going to have to make a selling point, the GPU, instead of trying to make this a budget $300 product, because it's not a budget product. It costs more. It's over 200 millimeters squared of just 4 nanometer, whereas the 8900X is like dual 80 millimeters squared of 4 nanometer. and then 120 of 6, which means the overall cost, I've heard the packaging is like $5 or something. So the overall cost is about the same. I mean, think about it. The 8900G has 4 Zen 5, 8 Zen 5C. Now, same IPC, but those 8 Zen 5C will be clocked 20 to 30% lower. And it's still an APU built for mobile. So the 4 full Zen 5 cores probably still boost 10% lower. So you're looking at something that costs the same to make as an 8900X, yet 20 to 30% lower multi-threading performance and 10% lower single threading. They have to make its selling point the graphics card. That's the whole point, that it's a bigger die with the graphics card, is because it has a graphics card. That's why you would spend the money for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why. I don't know why else you would release that to the market. So,
yeah. And in fact, the more I talk about this, the more I think the best thing to do is just take the best yields of Strix Point and just sell them as gaming laptops, and then the less efficient, fully enabled yields, those, will go into ones maybe with a graphics card, but you won't use the graphics card on the AGPU as much. And for desktop, I think if they have an appreciable amount of these yields, they should take the worst voltage yields, and then ones that have only 8 to 10 cores enabled. Now, the reason I say 8 to 10 cores is maybe it's all 4 Zen 5, but half of the Zen 5C cores are disabled, or there's 2 Zen 5 and 8 Zen 5C cores disabled. Maybe both. Maybe they'll offer both options.
Mm-hmm.
I think you take that yield, those yields that have all compute units enabled still, and you sell that as like a 8750G. Actually, I think that would perfectly fill a hole in their lineup. 8950X3D, 8950X, and then for like $450, you have the 8900X. And then for like $380, you have the 8750G 10 core with a graphics card. And then above that is the 8 core X3D, because it's actually probably better multi-threading actually than that G2.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the way you go about it.
Yeah, I think that would sell really well, and I don't think that would make any of their CPUs look stupid. which is the weird part they're going to have to do in the market if they release these to desktop eventually, which I assume they will at some point. That's the thing that they're going to need to do, is make sure that their parts aren't cannibalizing each other.
Right, and I'm just looking at what the performance of this it could be in a good scenario. 7600, the RX 7600 has, so about 21.75 teraflops. And I think that Strix Point could get to, we could be getting to like 14 teraflops or something. So you're looking at something that, again, we're looking at something that could get to around 3050 or 1660 Ti performance and stuff. And, you include that in like a $380 APU. Hey, getting like a $250 CPU and a $200 GPU for $100 off. I think that makes sense. And then also remember, this thing doesn't use any energy total. Like maybe on desktop too, who knows? It's RDNA 3 Plus on 4 nanometer. For all we know, with a 125 watt TDP, you could push this sucker to like 3.5 gigahertz. And that'll be really, really good. So I think that's a good product, but it's only a good product if they can find a way to sell it as, below an 8900X, but not that much less, because it actually costs more to make. Anyways, though, that is all the reader mails. That is all of the questions. That is all the rambling. While I try to remember what I was talking about the 8900G at the end there, but I think I got there. Any final thoughts, Dan?
No, I don't think so.
That's it? That's all you got?
That's all I got.
Are you feeling okay, though? You seem totally normal now compared to the last episode. In fact, you seem, we recorded the last episode with you like at midnight, so of course you're more awake now, but
feeling pretty good, I think. Okay.
Well, I hope you had an okay break. I'm glad that we got to finally come back, and you seem to be operating on all cylinders here for this episode. A reminder to everybody that, there's a die shrink that just went out. That's like an hour long, looking at the Apple Vision Pro and actually looking at the overall VR market as a whole. I think there were some interesting conclusions we came to about how like all VR companies have seemingly decided at the same time that based on the data they have, VR is not ready to go mainstream. It's actually time to milk everybody. And that video is very good. I think it's there for patrons for just $2 a month, and $4 a month gets you early ad-free versions of Broken Silicon. The ability to ask me any questions on Broken Silicon, thanks in the credits. There's higher tiers with more content there for you as well. You have the extra money, just $4 a month. Really helps keep the lights on, including all different colored lights that we have here at Moore's Law is Dead. And we appreciate our patrons who do that. But otherwise, support the sponsors if you need their products. We also can't do this without them. And thank you for watching and listening, everybody. I hope you have a good week.
Goodbye, everyone.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Kerry No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Kerry No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Jits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Jan Ronner, Daniel Hyde, Brian Riggleman, Sam Miller, MJB1, Deke, GZ Ziggy, SNES Chalmers, Jerem Ferreira, Andrew S, Falco Malev, General Drips, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Eric Jackson, Sarcastro, Evan Dingle, Greg G. Wantek, Chris Rich, Nicholas Buckner, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Jesse Jeskowiak, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Booma, Blake, Hard4Room.com, Franco Frederic, Shredbird, Dr. Foreman, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Ricky Tan, Christopher Butler, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Stu, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Nanan, Sammy Malas, Deepest Learners, Mad, Zuzu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Greg, Patrick Groh, Steven, Jordan Simkovic, Amiable Chief, Aaron, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Julian Leaked, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, The Boss Haas, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Cameron, Wheezy Sager, Henry Zhang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Roger Davies, Cameron, Hexapuma, Chrysantine, Meyer Techrance, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Jackson Miller, Frank Zielinski, Neithra Zink, The Eternal Dreamers, JSMMH, Game and Since Reagan, Jeff Settler, AWS Danny, Loophole 35, Winstar,
James I. Rader, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Pulse Media, Dave Schultz, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bussell, I-711-700K, Joe Foot, Hardland, Slushboss C2, Jensen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Park, Keith Moore, Him, Sagung, Tails, 2299, Stephen Santiago, John Sisyphus, Earth, Taurus, The Forbidden Juice, Fenty CZ, Kiko Sato, Toka, RB Razor, Sven, There, Jensen, AC, Clint Sundin, Ben, Michael Cozy, Dr. J. Mad, Alex Vega, Free D, John Swin, Rodent BC, Joey Strong, Brian Riggleman, Tim 1K, Joe LaMartina, Kikum, Elder Gunn, Solarize 80, Christopher Ricks, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.